The most daring con artist in American history wasn't masterminding bank robberies or running shadowy crime syndicates. He wasn't a kingpin or a gangster. No, Frank Abagnale Jr.'s greatest skill was something far subtler. He forged identities, slipped through systems, and convinced the world he was someone he was not. By the time he was 21, he had impersonated pilots, doctors, lawyers, and college professors. He had cashed millions in fraudulent checks and outsmarted the FBI itself. And somehow, he did it all with charm, audacity, and an almost childish sense of confidence. Welcome to Doc Does Financial History, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it looks. To understand just how Abagnale pulled it off, you have to step into the world he grew up in, a world of suburban upheaval, broken families, and the post-war American dream gone sideways. Frank Abagnale Jr. was born in 1948 in Bronxville, New York. His father, Frank Abagnale Sr., was a successful businessman, and his mother, Paulette, managed the home. On the surface, they were a picture-perfect family, but behind closed doors, life was unraveling. His parents' marriage was falling apart, and by the time Frank was in his early teens, the divorce hit him like a tidal wave. For many teenagers, divorce is a shock. For Frank, it became the spark that would set his life on a very unusual path. Feeling abandoned and desperate to regain a sense of control, he ran away from home at just 16. But he wasn't interested in petty crime or rebellion in the usual sense. Instead, he discovered a world of systems, banks, airlines, schools, and governments, and realized he could manipulate them. Where most people saw rules, he saw opportunities. Where most people saw authority, he saw gaps and blind spots. His first major con was shockingly simple. He had learned that banks were extremely trusting of checks, and that if a check looked legitimate, most bank employees wouldn't question it. So he started small, forging checks for a few dollars at a time. But small sums didn't satisfy him. Frank quickly realized he could scale his operations if he mastered the art of confidence. In his own words, the safest way to check if someone will believe a lie is to tell them confidently. And tell it he did. By 1963, at just 15 years old, Abagnale Jr. was already living a double life. He skipped school, dressed like a professional, and began impersonating an airline pilot. But this wasn't some reckless costume party. He actually applied and obtained a real pilot uniform from Pan American World Airways, a symbol of trust and authority. With this uniform, he could walk onto planes, ride for free, and even stay in expensive hotels without paying. Pilots at the time were symbols of the elite, the best-paid professionals in the skies, and by impersonating one, Frank instantly gained access to a world that most teenagers could only dream of. But the pilot impersonation wasn't just about the thrill. It was a gateway to his bigger con, check fraud. Frank discovered that if he looked legitimate, banks would cash even large checks drawn on accounts from distant states or countries. So he traveled the country, flying deadhead on planes, sleeping in hotels, and cashing forged payroll and traveler's checks wherever he went. Within months, he was racking up hundreds of thousands of dollars. And again, it wasn't about violence or intimidation. It was about audacity and appearance. If you looked like you belonged, people assumed you did. Next came medicine. At 18, Abagnale posed as a chief resident at a Georgia hospital. Doctors and nurses trained to respect authority never questioned him. He performed medical rounds, signed prescriptions, and even supervised interns, all without ever attending medical school. The hospital staff assumed he knew what he was doing. Frank later admitted that he relied heavily on the fact that most people are polite, deferential, and don't want to appear ignorant. Law was another playground. At 19, he obtained a law degree from a correspondence school and passed the bar exam in Louisiana. For a short time, he worked at a legitimate law firm, convincing partners he was a fully qualified lawyer. Again, no one questioned him until the law itself caught up with him. Frank's cons weren't just isolated tricks. They were part of a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. He knew that people trusted uniforms, titles, and appearances. He understood that social proof, seeing others trust him, made people less likely to question him. He relied on fear of missing out and the desire to believe in competence. He didn't need complicated technology or insider knowledge. He needed confidence, charm, and an ability to read people. By the time he was 20, Abagnale had committed millions of dollars in fraud. Some estimates put the total at around $2.5 million in the 1960s, equivalent to over $20 million today. Banks across the country were scratching their heads, trying to trace the checks, but Frank was always a step ahead. He changed locations constantly, forged documents faster than authorities could track them, and avoided detection by maintaining a calm, charming demeanor. But no con lasts forever. The FBI, led by Agent Joseph Shea, had taken notice. Shea was assigned to track Abagnale down and had a personal determination to catch the young fraudster. The cat-and-mouse game that followed was relentless. Frank continued his cons, traveling to dozens of countries, each time leaving a trail of impressed, bewildered, or financially harmed institutions behind him. He was eventually caught in 1969 in France, arrested for fraud, and extradited to the United States. What's remarkable about Frank Abagnale's story isn't just the audacity of his crimes, it's what came next. While serving time in federal prison, he realized that the skills he had used to deceive others could be put to positive use. Instead of fading into obscurity, Frank made a deal with the FBI. He agreed to help authorities prevent fraud, using his knowledge of banks, checks, and human psychology to train law enforcement and financial institutions. Over the decades, Abagnale became one of the world's foremost experts on fraud prevention. He worked with the FBI, consulted for corporations, and wrote books detailing his exploits and the lessons he learned. The movie Catch Me If You Can, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, dramatized his life, capturing the thrill, charm, and complexity of his early cons. But the reality, as always, was both more astonishing and more instructive. Frank's life teaches lessons about trust, human psychology, and the thin line between genius and crime. Even decades later, Frank Abagnale Jr.'s legacy shapes modern fraud. Check scams, identity theft, and phishing all exploit the same human tendencies he once did: trust in appearances, fear of missing out, and assuming others' competence. Yet his story is more than crime, it's redemption. From fugitive to FBI advisor, he helped prevent billions in fraud, showing that brilliance can serve good when redirected. Still, his life thrills. He bent ordinary systems, banks, airlines, hospitals to his will, blending charm with deception. Abagnale's tale proves that ordinary human traits can lead to extraordinary consequences. Frank's story also underscores how society underestimates the power of confidence and appearance. People assume expertise comes from credentials or experience, but Abagnale demonstrated that perception can be as powerful as reality. If you look the part, act the part, and speak the part, people often won't question what they see. That lesson resonates far beyond crime. It applies to leadership, negotiation, and daily social interactions. By the time Abagnale reached his mid-20s, he had been arrested multiple times in multiple countries, yet his life was far from over. He leveraged his notoriety, writing books and consulting, eventually becoming one of the most respected voices in anti-fraud expertise. In a way, his life came full circle. The young man who deceived the world became the man the world relied on to prevent deception. And while the movie Catch Me If You Can dramatized some of the escapades, the piloting adventures, the hotel frauds, the near misses with the FBI, the essence of the story remains true. A young man with audacity, intelligence, and charm managed to bend institutions, exploit trust, and evade authorities on a scale that seems almost fictional. Yet it was real. Every forged check, every stolen identity, every impersonation was a calculated step in a meticulously crafted game that tested the limits of human trust and institutional vulnerability. Frank Abagnale Jr.'s story isn't just about crime, it's a lesson in human behavior, psychology, and resilience. He showed how one person could navigate rules, exploit gaps, and survive against enormous odds. More than the cons themselves, his story highlights the systems we trust, the assumptions we make, and what happens when that trust is abused. Even today, the principles he exploited, trust in appearances, fear of missing out, and assumptions about competence, remain relevant in finance, business, and daily life. His life also shows that brilliance can be redirected from harm to help. So when you think of the young man who posed as a pilot, a doctor, and more, remember, the legacy isn't the deception, it's the lessons. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with others, and subscribe for more content.